Welcome into the Locked On Packers Squad Show. I am your host. My name is Brandon Sneide. The NFLPA released their rankings. The Packers coming in not a great spot, but I don't know about you. I am putting zero, and I mean zero stock into that report card.
You know, there's always a gripe from somebody, so I'm looking forward to digging into this one tonight.
And as my dad used to always say, they're not happy unless they've got something to complain about.
Go Pack Go! It's the Packers Squad. Everything Green Bay Packers every week. Covering all the big hits and game-changing plays from Titletown. The way only the Locked On Podcast Network can. From the frozen tundra with all the cheeseheads, the Packers Squad Show starts now.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast. Wherever you find audio podcasts, you will certainly find Locked On Packers, the number one Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for the fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to each and every single one of you who continues to make Locked On Packers your first listen each and every day. It's the offseason, but it doesn't matter. We got a packed one here for you tonight. We're opening the questions back up for Ask Coach Jags Anything. I got one already in store for Coach, so we're going to dive in. If you got a question, you're on the live stream right now, get your question turned in. I will read it to Coach Jags. All and any questions are welcome tonight. Before we get to all of that, though, we're asking a bigger question. What actually defines a successful 2026 offseason in Green Bay? Is it splash moves? Is it draft? What is it? Is it something deeper? We'll dive in to all of that. And speaking of taking a deeper dive, the NFLPA report cards are out, and the Packers coming in at 21st, gentlemen, in the entire NFL. 21st. So what does that say about the organization? Is it just fluff? Does it reveal something more real about the direction of this team? Let us start there, shall we, this evening on the Locked On Packers Squad Show. And Coach, no better person to talk to about these grades than the guy who actually was in those facilities, in the cafeteria, in the weight room, in the medical facilities. Coach, can you speak on your time in Green Bay, on some of these areas in which the Green Bay Packers got graded? I don't know if it was necessarily unfairly, but I'll give you a couple of areas they got graded on. The food and dining area for the Green Bay Packers, they were graded on a B+, nutritious and dietitian, a B. Locker room, that was just redone, Coach, an A. Training room and training staff, Coach, both a C. The weight room, an A-. How was your time in Green Bay when you were there, Coach, when it came to these facilities and these parts of the organization?
You know, it's funny you just said that the locker room was already just upgraded again. I mean, it was as nice a facilities and organization. I've been in 3. So I was in Atlanta and I was in Tampa Bay, and they're all good guys. They're all good all over the league. There's not one that's like, God, what a bad deal that we have here, and I don't want to be here type of deal. But I read that same article, Brandon, and I was really kind of shocked, actually, like players griping. But here's the thing. You're never going to keep everybody happy. You know, we were talking about like the nutritional deal. They have a cafeteria for the players, and it was first class. Everything that they did, you know, when Ron Wolf came, he changed that whole dynamic on what the Packers were. So it was really surprising when I saw some of that. And one of the other ones is like the no child care. Who cares?
That's the one.
Brandon, you're the probably guy griping. You want to go drinking and
and I hear this, Coach. I hear it's standard across the NFL. Like
it is.
Cool. That's great.
Right.
However, most of this team, I understand not everybody's making $1 million, but a good chunk of this team, I think everybody on this roster, Coach, is in 6 figures. I think like the childcare thing, like you got, corporations that hire employees that make billions of dollars. I know the NFL makes billions of dollars. I know that's an argument being thrown around on the internet that don't, give their employees childcare. I guess this sounds a little bit cold, Coach. I don't really care if my team isn't providing childcare for 6-figure employees or millionaire employees.
No, I mean, I either. And again, that one I kind of saw was kind of a ridiculous deal. But the other ones, like the facilities and the I want to just talk about the training staff. they're always top notch. Let's just talk about the orthopedic surgeon that they had, Pat McKenzie, who just retired after 25 years. As respected an orthopedist as there is in the country. You know, he trained with Andrews down in Birmingham. That's where he learned. So he's the guy that everybody goes to, like, for knees. But Pat's helped so many players and get those guys back on the field again, and that's what they do. And then, you know, as far as like the trainer, Flea was there when I was there. But he was like young when I was there. And you know, he's worked his way up, took over for Pepper Burris, that was there forever when Ron brought him in. And, you know, they do not spare a cent in those professional teams. And there was not one thing I could see that Packers go, oh, this is kind of subpar. I just don't believe that at all.
Jacob, there's an article out there, and I just want to read a little bit of it, which I thought was very, very interesting when it comes to the Green Bay Packers head coach. And then I want to get your overall thoughts on the Packers NFLPA report card coming in at 21st in the entire National Football League. It says, and I'm reading the article, head coach Matt LaFleur dropped a full letter grade this season and ranks second to last in the league in respect for players. Jacob, am I crazy? Because you've been in that locker room. You were there all season long. I vividly remember Micah Parsons. I vividly remember Jordan Love, Xavier McKinney, Josh Jacobs, Zach Tom,
Tucker
Kraft. I remember all of these guys raving for Matt LaFleur to get that extension and be a part of the Green Bay Packers organization going forward. I guess I'm scratching my head, Jacob. I don't really understand this grade for the Packers when it comes to the head coaching. Matt LaFleur coming in for the head coach at a B-. Jacob, your thoughts on that part of it, but overall also as the Packers coming in at 21st.
Yeah, so the thing about respect for players, I do know that I believe it was last year's report card, if memory serves too, that said like players didn't feel like their input was received or taken in fully or whatever it was. And maybe that's what that means. I think the way people are spinning that is LaFleur doesn't have the respect of the players, which is those are two different things. Okay. Like the players can respect him without, and also say like, hey, I wish that we had more input on, you know, X, Y, Z or whatever. And I do know LaFleur is kind of a control freak and wants to control every little thing. A very good example of that is the story that has come out since the championship game years ago against the Bucs, where Pettine called a play and LaFleur kind of overruled him, essentially, is what has been reported since then. And it's like, well, did you hire a defensive coordinator or did you hire someone that you need to babysit? That's kind of the, you know, question that's worth asking on that. So that part doesn't fully surprise me that maybe he's not taking the input. And the other thing about this is maybe he's not taking the input because the players are young. You know, how much input and how much trust do you have of
youngest roster 3 years in a row?
It's easy to say like, oh yeah, I trust Aaron Rodgers, the 20-year pro, 4-time league MVP and stuff like that. But it's like, hey, are you asking for input from Matthew Golden, who I'm just picking a name, but like he's a rookie, and how much input do you give a rookie? Probably not a whole hell of a lot, right? So that part was interesting to me. I will tell you, him getting a lower grade, this happened before the team went on a 5-game losing streak to finish the season. So with that in mind, it's not like players just have a bitter taste in their mouth of a bad end of the season. And I will tell you, one of the point that you just made about Kraft and Jacobs and Love and Parsons and all these guys saying they wanted LaFleur back, as someone who said he would have moved on after that Chicago game, this does not give the warm and fuzzies of, well, you know what? He's got the full-throated support of the locker room. Everything is still there. Like, I'm not going to say their 2026 season is doomed and it's over and like before it even starts or anything crazy like that, because that would be silly to do so. There's not a game for another 7 months that matters, or 6 months that matters, right? But if it doesn't go well next season, this is something that we will point back to and go like, man, you know what? Maybe that mattered more than what we let on. The other thing I will say, it is so hard to – Coach, you know this as well as anybody, right? There is so much that goes on, and we have more information now than we ever have when it comes to what's going on inside 1265 or any NFL organization in the world. Maybe not as much as like the Dallas Cowboys, but that team is a reality show on its own, right?
Literally, quite figured.
Yeah, quite literally. Yeah. So that part to me, still, there's so much that we don't know, right? And there's so many ways that something I could tell you just from conversations I've had with the general manager, the head coach, the actual people that make these decisions, everything like that. They think so differently than what the average fan, and I'm not saying the average fan, that's all I am, right? The only reason I'm doing this stuff is because I was an average football fan who likes watching the team play on Sundays, right? The average fan, however, thinks emotionally and everything like that. And these players or these teams, the people in charge, have to do their best not to do that. So that's where some of this stuff, it's just hard to know who does what does when, why does this lead to whatever, and how does it all tie in to what you see on Sunday afternoon. So with the team finishing 21st in rankings, I think some of that is being dragged down by the grade that you were talking about of the training room, which is now being remodeled as we
Correct.
speak. So that's something.
And they just did the locker room. They did get an A for that at least. So the parking lot was redone, Coach. I know in your time it was essentially public parking where you guys parked, but now it's all redone. Coach, there's some names in here I want to read. Matt LaFleur got a B-. Say what you want about Matt LaFleur. Is some of it valid? Yeah, I suppose some of it is valid, I guess, right? But he does win. They have gone to the playoffs. He did usher in the Jordan Love era and a seamless transition and has turned Jordan Love into an MVP candidate. Matt LaFleur, the 5th lowest ranked coach in the NFL. A couple names in front of him, Coach, that kind of stick out to me. Raheem Morris, who got fired. A B+. It's going to be funny because he's on the coaching staff now. Jonathan Gannon, Coach, ahead of Matt LaFleur. He also got fired. This one's hilarious. The Titans, and they just say Titans in front of Matt LaFleur, Coach, because they had multiple head coaches in that year get a better grade than Matt LaFleur. Dave Canales out there in Carolina. I know they had a fun, season. They got to the postseason, so I guess that can be warranted. Todd Bowles also ahead of Matt LaFleur as well. I have a theory for you guys on this, and I'm curious, Coach, you were in the college game. Jacob, I know you pay close attention to the to college, obviously the NFL, you're right, for SI, but also for college football. So everything that I said before are things that they got graded on. They got graded on strength coaches. They got a B. Position coaches, B+. Offensive and defensive coordinator, a C and an A- in those categories. Jeff Hafley no longer here. He gets the best grade for the entire team. Special teams coordinator got a better grade, Coach, than Matt LaFleur, who got a B-. Rich Bisaccia got a B+. Team travel, B-. We mentioned the head coach at a B-. General manager, a B+. Coach, I disagree with that one. Team ownership for Mark Murphy last year, an A-. Ed Policy. Let me ask you guys this, or at least let me present this to you, and why I think my theory on some of this team travel and the nutritionists and the food and dining area. Has college football skewed these guys coming in to the NFL a little bit? Like when you're a college athlete nowadays, you're getting wined and dined. People are kissing the ground you walk on. We've seen, my goodness, Coach, some of these facilities in college football, Georgia, Notre Dame, Alabama, like they blow the NFL out of the water so that when guys come up to the NFL, they see these facilities and they're like, it's not that great. Like, oh yeah, they just had steak and lobster. They didn't have anybody to watch my kids, so I could, do this or that. Right. Has college sort of ruined the way that these NFL facilities are being judged on, in your opinion?
That's really a great question, Brandon, because these colleges are spending so much money. There's so much money
Billions.
And here's the thing is everybody's got to keep up with the Joneses. The last SEC school I was at Kentucky, and it was like unbelievable how the facilities were. And those were just middle of the road in the SEC. And you go to a place like Florida or Alabama or Auburn, Georgia. It's just unbelievable the amount of money and there's a lot of glitz and stuff in those deals. And here's why though, because if you fall behind in like the recruiting and that, you have to have as good or better facilities than everybody else. And players really liked it. Now it's a little bit more about just the dollar and how much money those guys are making, and they're going to the highest bidder. And hell, I heard that tackles are making in like at Ohio State like $2.53 million as a tackle.
You're making more. Yeah, you're making more in college than when you're first, unless you're a high draft pick. You're making more in college than you are in the pros.
Yeah, but you know what? you might make a valid point, because those facilities are so over the top on these, especially the
They're insane.
Huh?
They're insane. Like the one in Alabama and Georgia are just absolutely crazy. Here's something else that I want to talk both of you about. Coach, you've been in this. You coached at Lambeau Field. Jacob, you've traveled around the NFL and have covered different games on the road, but you've also covered all the Packers home games. The own stadium field ranking, again, there's not a ton of content in that. It could be field, it could be game day experience, it could be a plethora of maybe the home crowd. I don't know. The Packers, you guys, we all talk about Lambeau Field being a bucket list item for so many fans out there in the NFL worldwide. A C+. They're kind of dead center in the NFL. Baltimore came in at number 1. Again, not really sure about that one. Miami with an A-. Jacksonville came ahead of the Green Bay Packers. Washington came ahead of the Green Bay Packers. Arizona came ahead of the Green Bay Packers. The freaking Chicago Bears, Jacob, came in, and I know you were just at Soldier Field. They don't even want to be in Chicago. Their state doesn't want them in Chicago. They came in front of the Green Bay Packers. The Saints coming in front of the Green Bay Packers. I guess we don't have a ton of context. I don't know what they're adding for that calculation to come to a C+, but what are your thoughts on the Packers receiving a C+, sort of middle of the pack throughout the NFL for these players ranking their own stadium field?
Yeah, I'll say as far as like game day experience, there's some work to be done there. And by that, I mean the presentation of the game, player introductions, something as simple as not having to, and this isn't necessarily the Packers' fault, but not having to have a video of the quarterback telling the crowd to shut the hell up when the team is on offense because of that kind of stuff. And then not having to have, things to pump up the crowd on defense or something like that. But, I think back to stadiums. I was in Chicago this year. I was in Minnesota this year. And then I was in Green Bay and Arizona. And Arizona's the worst of those 4.
Better grade than the Packers, though, according to this.
Yeah, I don't understand that. But
a full letter grade, too, a B+.
It's interesting. Yeah. But I could tell Minnesota, to me, from a game presentation standpoint, was the gold standard as far, and that's just of where I've been this year. I've been, and that's just where I've been this year, right? Like if you go to last year, Denver, a couple years ago, Denver was awesome when I was there. I think that was very good. Las Vegas was brand new, so it's hard to say on that. And then what's the other one? Philadelphia. I think Philadelphia was a pretty cool little setup and a unique experience, is what Matt LaFleur always calls that. But with Green Bay,
the Eagles coming in behind the Packers. Sorry to cut you off, but I think the Eagles are coming in behind the Green Bay Packers. If I can find them, I don't even know where they are on this list. I don't.
And their stadium is older.
Philly's number 3. Yeah, you're right. Philly's number 3.
Yeah, and their stadium's older. I think they're working on potentially trying to get a new one. I know the Link opened in 2003, so it's a relatively new stadium, but it's interesting what's new and what's old and everything like that. But anyways, the point I'm getting at with the Vikings, before the game starts, they play these videos. It's very like, if you guys have watched Game of Thrones, and actually I haven't, but that's the feel that I kind of
You're
got
way
to
behind,
it.
Dude. You're
I know. I haven't watched The Sopranos and like
I haven't watched that either, but you're still watch the Game of Thrones, please.
I just finished Breaking Bad probably a couple years ago. Like I really am. I do live under a rock, and it's fine. But with the Vikings, like before the game, there's a video that comes in, and it is for the fans more so than the players and everything like that. But it's like the Vikings are coming. Turn back now or you'll be sorry, kind of just things like that. The horn is loud and obnoxious and annoying, and I know that too. I know the fake snow in the stadium is kind of lame, but I just think that their setup is really good with what they do before the game starts. The fans are kind of into it from the word go, and I think that part of that is a bit of a spoiled nature from this fan base. Like think about it. Last year, Green Bay goes 11-6. They lose in the first round of the playoffs. Like some cities throw a party about that. Some places talk about it like Green Bay fans. They talk about it like it is the worst season they've ever had. And I understand expectations change things, but I do think there's when Green Bay got back to the playoffs in 2023 after missing for just the one season, or even like the 2019 team after missing the playoffs, that team was easy to latch onto and fall in love with because they had been bad for for 2 straight years. Right. Green Bay is almost always good, and that kind of makes it that point. And the other thing is there is some romance to it because of they're old. They're the same bleachers that were there during the Ice Bowl and all that kind of stuff. But somebody points out in the chat here that it's because of the seating. I don't think that's an unfair assessment for people to say that like that would be a reason why the game day experience isn't as great. But for me in general, it really is the presentation of it. Bill Jarts is great.
Yeah.
But, I just feel like the crowds in the middle of the game, they're kind of lame. I just think I've never been told to sit down. So I don't know how much of that is like a straw man argument, but I do think that there is something to be desired from the crowd in a given game, to be in it from the word go. And like, not every game is the same, right? Like that first game against Detroit this year, there was some juice, right? The next game against Washington, there was some juice. Later in the year, they're playing Carolina on a November day or whatever, and it's just kind of the middle of nothing, and it's just kind of whatever. Like, I just feel like that leaves something to be desired. That's all.
Coach, was this ever a conversation with your time in Green Bay, whether it was, you don't have to name drop anybody if you want to, obviously you can, but was it ever a conversation like, man, this could be better here? Like the Packers are kind of lacking here. They're kind of lacking there. Could it have been better in areas? Or maybe was it the other way around? Like, man, we got it really good here. Like we have this and that. Were there any of those conversations being had with your time in Green Bay, Coach?
Yeah, that never did happen. It was because I'm telling you, the Packers.
Because you were worried about ball, Coach, right? And this, you weren't worried about babysitters.
No, we didn't worry about that. I had a bunch of kids too, but I had a babysitter at home, and they used to give you money. What the heck? They gave you a per diem. Yeah. I always gave the whole per diem to my babysitter. I said, we did a good job here. Take it all. So, but they never griped. And the thing is, you said that the Packers are like at a C+, like that's just average around the league.
It literally dead in the middle, Coach. C+ on average.
Really hard time. And I know that like Vegas has got a new stadium. The Rams have one. San Francisco's, theirs is deal. But I mean, as far as like the Packers facilities and everything, I mean, they were always top notch. Always the best.
The Green Bay Packers coming in at 21st in the NFL, according to the NFLPA report card. So if perception inside the building matters, then the next step could become quite obvious. What does a successful 2026 offseason in Green Bay actually look like? We examine those details next on the Locked On Packers Squad Show. Tonight's episode is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Have you ever wanted to experience the NBA Finals live and in person? Well, FanDuel is giving you the chance to turn that dream into reality with their NBA sweepstakes. Here's how it works. Use your profit boost on any NBA future, and you'll be automatically entered for a shot to win an NBA Finals trip for two. That's right. The flights, the tickets, the whole experience. If you're looking at the board and thinking what team can make a deep run, maybe it's the Milwaukee Bucks, 8 out of their last 10, then this is the perfect time for you to lock in. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Use your profit boost on an NBA future and get entered for your chance to win a trip to the NBA Finals. Play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Once again, visit FanDuel.com today to get started. Tonight's show is also brought to you by Indeed sponsored jobs, workplace chaos, those deadlines stacking up, your inbox is overflowing, and the one position you have to fill is still sitting open. When the pressure's on and you need the right hire, this is a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. They help you reach the people who actually fit what you're looking for, the skills, the experience, the location. So you're not just hoping the right candidate stumbles across your post. And here's kind of a stat that sums it up in the 30 seconds or so I've been talking to you. Companies like yours have made 27 hires on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. So if you're hiring, spend less time searching and more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of the Locked On Packers Locked On Packers Squad Show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to help get your job the premium status it deserves at Indeed.com/podcast. Just go to Indeed.com/podcast right now and support the Locked On Packers Squad Show by saying you heard about Indeed on this very show. Indeed.com/podcast, and terms and conditions do apply. If you need to hire, this sounds like a job for Indeed sponsored jobs. Thank you for making Locked On Packers your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network. I mentioned it at the beginning of the show. It is Thursday. We are so close to the weekend. It is Ask Coach Jags Anything. Line up those questions. Get them in. If you got a question for the former Packers coach, get it in. We'll get it on the show later on. But before we dive into all of that, Jacob, I want to begin with you here. And I'm kind of give you a broad question. So you can give me a big answer, a short answer, anything you find suitable to answer this question, because I don't really know. I feel like this can go a few different ways. I'm not really sure there's a right answer or there's probably a wrong answer, but that can depend on who you ask. How are we measuring a successful offseason in Green Bay? Is it drafting those right guys? Is it locking up guys that you want to keep here in Green Bay, a la Tucker Kraft? Like, what does a successful offseason in Green? Is it fixing the facilities, the dining facility in Green Bay? What does that look like, in your opinion, for the Packers entering the offseason in 2026?
Well, as my good friends Bill Huber and Jason Wilde always tell me, media starts with me. So I want to make sure that the media dining hall gets up. No, I'm kidding. But I really do. I think it's as simple as Green Bay's kind of defined their core players, right? They know who they are. Christian Watson and Tucker Kraft are core players. Those guys, I think, need to be extended for the long haul. And the sooner the better with both of those guys, because the price is only going to go up for both of them. After that, something Brian Gutekunst has done well, and I don't want to speak ill of Ted Thompson, because Ted Thompson is a Packers Hall of Famer and he won a championship in Green Bay, which is something that, I was 5 years old when Ron Wolf built the Super Bowl team in 1996. I don't really remember that versus now, I remember the Ted Thompson stuff, but something that Gutekunst has typically done better in the recent years. When Ted was in charge, you went into the draft kind of feeling like, okay, they have to do this, and this, because they didn't sign a free agent. They didn't grab a guy at this position that could, in theory, help solve that problem, right? Can they go into the draft this year by addressing, even if it's, on the margins, do they sign a Tyler Biadasz who just got released by Washington today?
UW, baby. Come on. Sure. Come on home.
Yeah, bring a Badger back home. Why not? That guy is mean and nasty, and I think he fits in really well with what Green Bay's trying to do. But that's not what I'm trying to get at here. But maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's on the smaller end, someone like Lloyd Cushenberry, who was cut yesterday from Tennessee. And I'm not saying that they have to do these things, but can they get it to the point where you're not pigeonholed in the draft to say, man, we didn't get a defensive tackle this offseason. We only have so many picks. I have to get one at pick 52. Because when you do that, that's how you guys have seen it in recent years. It's not quite the same, but it's the best example that I can give is during the draft that Green Bay got Jordan Love right in front of them in each of the first 3 rounds. It was like receivers just flew off the board. And it was because everybody kind of knew the Packers were trying to add a receiver to their roster. So when you have an obvious need like that, it's kind of like, man, I got to get in front of Green Bay to make sure that I can get the player that I want. Because if I don't get him, Green Bay is going to, right? So to me, it's getting those guys, those core guys that they have locked in. And again, not pigeonholing yourself in the draft. And frankly, the draft has to be better this year than it has been, especially, last year. And these are guys that I know Green Bay doesn't really play rookies, but they need to find some guys that make some impact and some positive impact. And I don't want to say immediately, but something to where you can point to and say, okay, this is what this guy's going to do. This is what this guy's going to do. And this is what this guy's going to do. And above all else, the biggest thing is something we won't know until the season starts or training camp starts. Put the same 5 offensive linemen on the GD field at the same time for the whole time. No more rotations. No more playing this guy series to series. No more playing this guy game to game. Who's my left tackle, left guard, center, right guard, and right tackle? And those guys are going to start and they're going to play as long as they're not injured. I know injuries happen. But that, to me, I'll get on that soapbox from now until the day they toss dirt over top of me. Continuity in the offensive line matters, damn it.
Coach, how did you guys measure your off seasons? Did you have checklists that you wanted to knock out? Obviously you don't really know who your team's going to draft until that happens. And then it kind of turns into the start of the season, essentially, with camps and all that stuff going on. How did you guys from a coach's perspective, how did you guys measure offseason, whether you did a good job or you needed to improve?
Well, everything was a scheme evaluation. So as soon as the season was ended, you got a week off and you came right back to work and you were doing scheme evaluation, and you just tore your offense, defense, and special teams down to the bare walls and evaluated everything. So, and then after that, I mean, it was who do we need to improve this team through a free agency, though that's more of a quicker fix. And I know it's more money, but the philosophy of the Packers was always to go ahead and build through the draft. And I still think that they do that quite a bit. So they're going to have to find out and identify the players that will fit the Packer way. And that was the way it was always identified with Ron as he was talking and getting ready for the draft. So, I mean, you had to be a certain type of guy to be in Green Bay too. It took a special player. And when players got drafted in Green Bay, they always made it feel like this is like the best place ever.
Jacob, I noticed you didn't really mention contract extensions necessarily. Do you think it's possible you could chalk it up as a successful offseason if you were to lock up a guy like Tucker Kraft? There's some conversation around a guy like Christian Watson, what the Packers should do. He did just sign an extension. However, that kicks in this year and he will be a free agent after that is expired. Is this also an important year where, and I know Tucker Kraft's coming off the ACL injury, but is this an important offseason where the Packers need to lock up some of that future talent? Devontae Wyatt obviously could be thrown into that conversation. Is there anybody else that I may be missing that the Packers could be looking at for future contract extensions?
Yeah, I think the big two are Watson and Kraft. And I think those are no-brainers. I think that the general manager, if you toss some truth serum in him, would tell you the same thing. He basically already said as much about Tucker Kraft. With Watson, that's a receiver market. It's a third contract, but it's really a second contract in terms of like earning potential and everything like that. So finding who or where that number is going to be for him. But to me, those are the two easiest ones. And Wyatt is one where I don't know if he's earned an extension necessarily, but by necessity of keeping someone with his skill set in the locker room, and to lower his cap hit number. I think he's scheduled to have a cap hit of about $15 million to where if you give him an extension, it could lower that. I'm really curious to see what Green Bay does with the contract situation, because general managers are paid to lie. Jags always likes to say that every single week, right? But the way he talked about like Rashawn Gary, for example, at the Combine this week, he's not going to go to the podium and say, yeah, he stunk. He was awful. What do
you mean, Jacob? That's what fans want.
Right. And yeah. And that's how next year you get an even lower grade on the report card when you go up there and say, hey, this guy's terrible. But I'm curious to see what they do with some of those guys that are, I think Elton Jenkins is an easy one, but Rashawn Gary.
You saying it's an easy one in what direction for
they'll
him?
cut. Yeah, they'll release him.
Okay.
I'm almost certain of that.
Okay.
But I'm curious to see what they do from a contract standpoint, both with guys that are already on the team. What do they do with those? And then guys that are we talked about this last week, expiring contracts in the next 2 years: Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, Dontavion Wicks, Tucker Kraft, Devontae Wyatt, Lucas Van Ness, Luke Musgrave, Edgerrin Cooper, Javon Bullard. Evan Williams. I just named like 10 guys, and that's off the top of my head. And some of them less important than others, obviously, but that's a war chest of players that even if you want to keep, 6 of them, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of money to keep.
Now the cap is moving up, but
sure,
so are salaries.
Yeah, so are salaries, and that's just kind of the nature of how this is going to work, right? Like you can keep the guy. Ultimately, they make plans like guys. Their cap spreadsheet is spread out to when my son is in high school, he's 3 years old, right? So that's the way that these guys operate. They're ahead of the game. They know. That's why like reporting, quote unquote, this week that they want to keep Romeo Doubs. To me, that's the agent having Green Bay's permission, which Andrew Brandt said they did this, having the agent's permission to use the Packers name to drive up the price. Because if Green Bay keeps Doubs with the money he's going to be able to command, now you're talking about that probably at the expense of one of Kraft or Watson. And if they choose Romeo Doubs over Christian Watson, I got a lot of questions as to what exactly it is. And that's not even a knock on Doubs. It's just one player is clearly superior to the other one. That's all that is. But I'm curious what they do.
Coach, how much would you have enjoyed coaching Tucker Kraft? You're a tight end guy.
Yeah.
How much would you have loved coaching a guy like Tucker Kraft? I know he's coming off the injury. I expect him to be back and fully healthy at the start of the year, but what would it be like for you to coach a guy like Tucker Kraft?
I tell you what, I've been really, really fortunate in my career as a tight end coach. I've had a bunch of Pro Bowlers. I had Chewy to start out with, and then Bubba Franks, and I had LG Crumpler, and I had some really, really good,
pretty good room right there, Coach.
it was really, really a good room too. And I think, and I mentioned this early on in the season, I thought he was as good. He was, in my opinion, he was better than Bubba Franks, a lot better. Bubba was always good inside like the 15-yard line. And he was a big red zone guy.
LG too, right? Or was LG more like vertical?
LG had the best hands of any receiver I've ever been around. Yeah. He was that good. I mean, he was one of those guys, like when you threw the ball to him, you could never even hear him catch it because it was so soft. His hands were so soft. But I've been really lucky and fortunate to be around a lot of good players. But I thought Tucker Kraft, just watching him in the games and being able to talk about it in this podcast, I thought he was as good as any tight end in the league when he was playing at a high level early in the season. I mean, I really did. It was a shame that he got hurt. But and we had talked about it on the last show that we don't have to sign him early or whatever. We were talking with Peter, that conversation.
Yeah, so Peter wasn't necessarily on board with having to do it right away. I think it should be done as soon as possible.
I mean, it kind of shows good faith. I know the guy's got a knee, but those knees aren't like it used to be, right?
He might have been.
When a guy hurts his knee like that, and they're maybe a little bit reluctant to sign a guy, but they know who he is and what he can do. And the thing is, when you took him out of the lineup, the tight end play was very subpar.
Coach, he still led them in yards after the catch. He missed the last month and a half of the season and still led them in yards after the catch.
Well, that just tells you something right there, the type of the numbers that he was getting. But I think he is a Pro Bowl tight end all the way. And I know there's a lot of good ones in the NFC. I know there's a lot of good ones, but I think he was right up there with them. Super productive.
Speaking of super productive, we didn't get a full season of him, Coach, but I think we saw enough of him. And I know we've kind of discussed this a little bit on the Locked On Packers squad show. Do you think, because this is the question that is asked every training camp for Matt LaFleur, really it's never not asked throughout the course of the season, do you think Christian Watson is a true number one receiver in the NFL?
Boy, he's super productive. I think and again, I didn't know him much before this season. I haven't seen him as he was younger, but he is super productive as well. And he's explosive.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how big he was. What is he, 6'3", 210?
6'4". Yeah, 6'4". Yeah.
And I think he's super athletic and he can stretch the field. I think he's everything that you want in a number one wide receiver.
A couple of those names are responsible on this roster because of Brian Gutekunst. That brings me to my next question for you, gentlemen. But before we get into that, at the NFL Combine, which is obviously happening as we speak, General Manager Brian Gutekunst was asked what needs to happen in order from this team to go from pretender to a contender. Here's his answer.
Yeah, I think, we've talked a lot about this, our ability to be more consistent in situational football and finishing off games. A number of our games the past couple of years, we've been up in the games and just not been able to close them out. And our group's got to get to that point, So I think we're on our way there. I really like the guys in our locker room, and I like the makeup of our team. But that's an area that we have to fix.
An area we have to fix, Jacob, is how he ends his answer to that question. In order, how can this team get to the next level? Do you trust in the plan right now with Brian Gutekunst at the helm? Obviously, him and Matt LaFleur, contract extensions in place. Are we trusting in Goody, Jacob, with what we've seen from him so far in the last few years?
With Gutekunst, yeah. He has some warts, no question. Is he Howie Roseman? No. Is he John Schneider? No. But, I would have loved to have heard the pulse of what the thought on John Schneider was around the Packer fan base before this season, too. They had been kind of blech for a while.
Yeah.
But those are just two names that, obviously Schneider has built 3 teams that have gone to a Super Bowl. They've won 2 and they were a yard away from winning a third one. So, he might literally be 1 yard away from being in the Pro Football Hall of Fame as we speak at this point, which is kind of crazy to think about. But, there are some warts, like I just mentioned. He's had some misses. I was on board with Lucas Van Ness, for example, but it's a tough look when Lucas Van Ness has not been an impact player and Jackson Smith-Njigba is one of the best receivers in football, and Christian Gonzalez is one of the best corners in football. And they were both available. They were both a position of need at the time.
Don't
that
remind
you took
us.
Lucas Van
Don't
Ness,
remind us.
and it didn't work. But if you go through that, there's Christian Gonzalez was picked 20th. That means or Jackson Smith-Njigba, was picked 20th. That means there's 19 other teams that passed on him too. So it's not just Gutekunst who did that. But like I said, that's not a great look. My distrust of this team, if you will, or whatever, is all on-field stuff. And those are things that can be rectified. I do think for the most part, there are a few spots here or there. And I've mentioned on this show before how I think the Packers get a little too precious or a little too faithful in some of the guys that are already on the team or on the roster to make that jump or whatever, to the point where they won't pursue an upgrade because they believe in the guy who's already there. You know what I mean? But for the most part, I think that their roster is good enough to win a championship if they're relatively healthy. There's a 100% injury rate in the NFL, so there's no guarantee for that. But, the core of the team, the top of the team, if you will, Tucker Kraft, Christian Watson, Jordan Love, Micah Parsons, I got no qualms with any of those guys. It's just a matter of, I've seen this team lose way too many of the same style of game over the last really 3 seasons. I think one of the fair criticisms, I saw you guys talking about Jordan Love taking the next step
that may or may not have been me
on Tuesday night. And I think part of that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth because I didn't hear the whole segment, just the clip, but part of that is when the Packers had Aaron Rodgers in his prime and they played a crappy team at Lambeau Field, it was automatic. Money in the bank, that's a win.
Yep.
With Jordan Love, it has not been.
That was part of my argument.
And I know wins and losses are not a quarterback stat, but they also kind of are. And if the quarterback plays really well in a game, like Jordan Love did not play really well against Carolina and Philadelphia, for example. And those games both, Philadelphia not a bad team, Carolina not a bad team, but
Cleveland, good defense, but not a great, team.
And those games were ripe for the taking. And some of this, I think, falls on the shoulders of the head coach as well. I think he needs to, and we've talked about this a million times, but lean into the quarterback and don't be so stubborn as we have to be able to run the football, because I understand, yes, in a perfect world as a coach, you'd love to be able to just grind the game away with this dominant run game. Green Bay didn't have that, this past year. Maybe they will this upcoming year, but they did not last year. So as far as the roster goes, there's some things he has to fix, no question. Offensive line, not good enough. Defensive line, not good enough. Competition at linebacker, cornerbacks, maybe a speed back or something, to that kind of effect in the run game. But for the most part, anytime you start with Jordan Love and Micah Parsons in a given season, you're ahead of the curve. It's just kind of filling in the other 51 pieces around those guys. And they have a good chunk of that on the roster as well. But they have to start winning some of these games. And at some point, if they're not winning those games, it's not just the coach's fault, and it's not just it's kind of the player's fault, which then is in turn of a question to the general manager. Are you actually picking the right players, or do the Packers just have a bunch of guys that we think we really like, but it's like the old Brad Pitt line from Moneyball. If he's a good hitter, how come he doesn't hit good? Well, if they're a good team, how come they don't win good? Which isn't great grammar, but you know what I mean.
Coach, they've been the youngest roster in the NFL now for 3 straight years.
That has to change. I don't want that has to change.
And that leads me into you, Coach. Do you think adding a couple of veterans in key spots throughout this roster, we're in the middle of doing our free agency focus, and we'll continue that next Tuesday when Peter joins the show. Do you think they need to add some veterans? And if your answer is yes or no, it can be one or the other, but what kind of benefit does it have when you add those veteran pieces to a very young roster, which we have here in Green Bay?
I know. And the thing is, we keep saying about like how young the Packers are. Those young guys are getting older every year. So those guys that were 3 years ago, I mean, they've been in the program for 2 years in the organization.
And the postseason, Coach. Now the postseason. Exactly.
So they do have experience, and they do have limited playoff experience because they're losing in the wild card game. But it's interesting that Goody had mentioned in that clip. He said that he goes, "What needs to be fixed?" Well, why are you 0-5? Well, you're not finishing games. That's one of the biggest things.
You're talking about to end the season, Coach, right?
Yes. I mean, I think that's one of the really big questions and things that they have to figure out. Why aren't they finishing games at the end of the season? And why aren't they finishing games when you're up 20 points in Chicago? I mean, that should never happen. It should never happen at all. As far as bringing older players in, older players cost money. And I would keep putting all my money into the draft picks and keep developing. And I know they keep saying, well, it's the third or the youngest team in the last 3 years. At some point, we got to stop saying that. And these guys still have to produce because they're all getting paid a lot of money. So they need to produce. But I would take that youngest team, and I'd put that off to the side because you can't keep hanging your hat on that as an excuse.
Well, to the coach and the general manager's credit, they don't. Like, those guys are very open and saying they've played a lot of football. They've done all this stuff too. The counter argument that I have given is that I was the dumbest person I've ever met when I was 24 years old. Now that I'm 34 years old, I would probably handle things a little differently. Can you find somebody who's been through not just situations in football? Because the Packers have had a lot of guys who have played a lot of football now, and they've earned their scars or something like that, is what the phrase that Gutekunst has used before. But also people that have had life experiences. Have you had to go through something difficult? You know, you've probably gone through more things in your life at 34 than you have at 24, just for example. So can you find somebody who's in that spot to say, when it's 21-10 now in Chicago instead of 21-3, okay, the buck stops here. You know, finding a guy like that, whoever that is. And the Packers say that their goal is to hope that one of the guys they have grows into that player. And I understand that. But you know who is really helpful for the two of the better Packer teams that they've had in recent memories? Charles Woodson and Julius Peppers. Because instant credibility when you add a player to the ilk of Charles Woodson, Hall of Famer, in my opinion, one of the greatest defensive backs ever, and I would argue the greatest defensive back ever. And Julius Peppers, when they signed him, Hall of Famer if he retired before playing a snap in Green Bay. So having guys, I'm not saying they got to sign a Hall of Famer because those guys don't exactly grow on trees. It helps, though. That would certainly, yeah, if you could sign like 3 Hall of Famers, that'd be awesome. But getting somebody who is a little older, I'm not saying they got to be 40. It doesn't have to be Calais Campbell, but somebody who has some scars and some football life experience to kind of help them from melting down, if you will, not having that emotional maturity to withstand. Because you've seen it, guys, when Green Bay, for the most part, when the avalanche starts, sometimes they've, you know, kind of punched back a little bit from it. But when the avalanche starts, usually it doesn't stop. Denver and Chicago twice. Those are 2 really good examples of something, or 3 really good examples of that happening.
Coach, I want to put you in on the spot here a little bit, if you don't mind. And we have Ask Coach Jags anything coming up, so I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Real quick. A hard time listening to Jacob, and I really want to know what he's saying. So I've been having a hard time getting the audio from him. So just so you know. Okay.
He sounds good on my end, but I'm gonna get Coach play a little bit of a game here, and I want to put you into the shoes of Matt LaFleur. Okay, so you are Matt LaFleur. I'm gonna replay this Goody clip for you, and I want you to think if this is a shot at you. You are Matt LaFleur. Now, I know you're Coach Jags. You're much more handsome than Matt LaFleur, but I want you to kind of put yourselves in his shoes and see if this is more of a I'm kind of flicking the booger away from me and on to you, meaning taking a little bit of the blame as to why the Packers haven't advanced in the postseason. Here's Brian Gutekunst once again when asked what they need to do to go from pretender to contender.
Yeah, I think, we've talked a lot about this, our ability to be more consistent in situational football and finishing off games. A number of our games the past couple of years, we've been up in the games and just not been able to close them out. And our group's got to get to that point, So I think we're on our way there. I really like the guys in our locker room, and I like the makeup of our team. But that's an area that we have to fix.
Games we've been up and we just couldn't win. I like the makeup of our team. I like those guys in the locker room. We have to figure that out. Coach LaFleur, Coach Jags.
Yeah.
Does that feel like a shot to Matt?
No,
LaFleur?
I don't know. I don't think so, because here's the thing. Those guys just signed contracts together. Those guys are tied at the hip. And I guarantee you, when those guys go up onto the mic, they know what the heck. They're speaking each other language on what the direction of the football program is going to go. So no, I don't think so at all. And that no, absolutely not.
Okay.
Those guys are tied together at the hip. And you know what? When one fails, they're both going to fail. So I mean, everything is got to be that same message, whether LaFleur's on the mic or Goody's on the mic. It has to sound the same.
There's no question about it. 2026, whether it be in the offseason or come September, a massive season for the Green Bay Packers. We talked about trusting Goody. We talked about the NFLPA ranking the Packers 21st in the NFL. We talked about what a successful offseason looks like. It's time now to hear from some of you. It is time for some fun. It is Ask Coach Jags Anything. Get your questions lined up. We'll break into the brain of Coach Jags coming up right after this on the Locked On Packers Squad Show. Tonight's show is brought to you by Home Chef. As the new year gets going, a lot of people are trying to simplify their routines, and dinner is a big one. Those busy work days, cold winter nights, packed schedules, having an easy, reliable dinner plan makes a huge difference. And that's exactly where Home Chef comes in. They take the stress out of cooking by delivering fresh, pre-portioned ingredients right to your door with an easy-to-follow recipe that actually tastes great. They're rated #1 by users of other meal kits for quality, convenience, value, taste, and recipe ease. And it's easy to see why. Over 30 weekly options with Home Chef, including family-sized meals and different dietary choices. Recipes are simple, but they really feel elevated, even restaurant quality, with dishes co-created by chefs like Gordon Ramsay. For a limited time, Home Chef is offering Locked On Packers Squad Show listeners 50% off your first box, free shipping, and free dessert for life. Just go to homechef.com/lockedon. That's homechef.com/lockedon, and you will get 50% off your first box. You'll get free shipping, and you'll get free dessert. A couple of free in there. If it's free, it's for me. Must be an active subscriber to receive that free dessert, though. Go to homechef.com/lockedon today. Thank you for making Locked On Packers your first listen of the day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcasting network. I got a DM, Coach, and it's time for Ask Coach Jags Anything. You can open up the airwaves to you guys. If you got a question for Coach Jags, he's Coach Mark Chmura, Brett Favre, and Aaron Rodgers, Matt Ryan, Algie Klumper, Bennett, Boston College, Atlanta, Green Bay. If you got a question for Coach Jags, get them in right now. This is from David, Coach. He messaged it to me over on Twitter. He says, do you think the Packers will bring back Romeo Doubs? Now, obviously, the money comes into that equation for Romeo Doubs. I anticipate, Coach, that he will get priced out of Green Bay. But do you think they should try to bring back a guy like Romeo Doubs back to Green Bay?
I think when you bring a guy, what you're paying for is production. And I think that he was very, very productive. Every time you looked up, the guy was making plays. And I know everyone's remembering the onside kick that he dropped on that. But I think he's a very, very productive football player, and I would try to keep him in a wide receiving core.
All right. Another question for you, another receiver question, Coach. And they asked, should we go after George Pickens in Dallas? And there's an and in here, and Max Crosby. I don't know if Las Vegas is in the business of trading away Max Crosby, but do you think, Coach, based off the question, should the Packers go after George Pickens, the wide receiver down there in Dallas, and Max Crosby?
Yeah, well, the first thing about Pickens, it became kind of a problem over there in Dallas. So I wouldn't take no. First of all, you don't want to buy a problem. You don't need that. And you're talking about like older guys in your locker room. All your money guys have to be leaders. So no on that. Crosby, I don't think they would let him go out of Vegas.
I don't think they would let him go, and I don't think the Packers would be able to afford that contract. I got one for you, Coach. If I could get one in, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Rank your tight end room all time for me.
That's great.
We started talking about it a little bit ago, so I figured I want to hear the rank. Give me the ranking and give me the reason as to why.
I will. Algie Crumpler is probably the best tight end that I had. He could do it all. He could block. He could catch. After the catch, he was great. And he was so sure-handed. I don't remember him dropping very many passes. And then I'll take Bubba Franks will be the next one. And he was a Pro Bowl player. And I remember the guy at Minnesota said, Jags, he goes, he only catches 3-yard passes. I go, well, they still count for 6. so that was good. There was a guy that I hadn't mentioned, Wesley Walls.
Oh, yeah.
Was with me too.
Yeah.
And they really brought him in. And I remember when he came into the room, he really helped Bubba out, like how to be a pro. because at one time Wesley was like the top tight end in the league when he was with the Carolina Panthers, and he was a great guy. Guy played at Ole Miss and played a ton of football, and he really helped Bubba. And then probably Mark Chimura would be the fourth one. But I tell you what, how about that tight end room? If you had all four of those guys, man.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I got another one before.
They were all Pro Bowlers. I mean, it was a great opportunity to be with those guys.
We got one here from Joe. It says, Jags, when you self-scout, what tendency shows up on third down that you're most concerned about? And what are you doing structurally to break that tendency before a playoff level opponent exposes it? Great question there from our friend Joe.
That's really a good question. So when you're doing third downs, it's broken down in third down 1 to 2, third down 3 to 6, third down 7 to 10, and third down 11 plus. So during the season, especially with Mike McCarthy, usually the third downs would be like day 2 of practice. First day would be your base passes, base runs, and all that. And then McCarthy thought that third downs were so important, we had third downs on the first day of practice during the week. So he emphasized that a lot. The biggest, it becomes almost like 50-50 is third down and 4 to 6. Offense wins, defense wins. That's the one that you really have to win, because the higher the third down, the higher the yardage, the more difficult it is to convert. So third down and 3 to 6 was the big one that we really worked a lot on.
Fantastic question there from Joseph. You guys got a question, get him in now. Jacob, I know you got one lined up, so go ahead.
Yeah, so I know that like now Gutekunst will take like input from his coaches on players that he wants in free agency or players that they want. Like I know Mike Pettin was saying like he wanted one of the Smith brothers when those guys signed in Green Bay. Ended up getting both. That was pretty cool. But in a unique situation, because when you were in Green Bay with Sherman, Mike was the general manager.
He was.
And then the first time you were here in Green Bay, Ron Wolf was, but you guys got fired after that first season there. So
Ray Rhodes, yes, Ray Rhodes.
So, So my question to you is, how much input, if any, did either of those guys, either Ron or Mike Sherman, give you or ask you guys for when it came to player acquisitions or anything like that?
A lot. Ron included everybody. He was very inclusive in the meetings, and he wanted you to give him his opinion on really what you thought about. He didn't want to hear what he wanted to hear. He really wanted your opinion. Actually, this is really a good story. Is when Chimura ended up leaving the team because he had some problems. We had the 13th pick in the draft, and we needed a tight end. So Ron said, Jags, he goes, there's 2 tight ends. It's Anthony Beck at West Virginia and Bubba Franks at Miami. He's coming out early. I want you to go down to Miami and meet this kid and see what you think. And I went down there and worked him out, and Butch Davis was down there. Chuck Pagano was down there that we worked together at one time. And I came back, and Ron goes, well, what do you think? And I said, well, Ron, I think that Bubba Franks is the guy that you want. And this is how Ron reacted. He goes, really? But see, he wanted me to give him my opinion. He didn't want what I thought he wanted to hear. I said, yeah, I think Bubba's got a lot more upside than Anthony Beck. Beck ended up going to the New York Jets and he did okay, and then Bubba became super, super productive for us. So, but Ron listened, and he wanted your opinion. It wasn't like you couldn't say what was on your mind. He wanted to know, and it was a collaborative effort, but then it comes down to Ron making the final say.
One final question here for you, Coach. This one just kind of dawned on me as you're talking about Bubba Franks and Mark Chimura. You were there with Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. We hear a lot of things that didn't go well between the two guys, but you were in the room with them. Like, you were literally in the room with them. You spent hours with them. Mm-hmm. If you don't mind, if you can, and if you can't, I totally understand. What's a positive story out of that relationship that you saw, that you were a part of with your time in Green Bay?
Well, they didn't. Again, the relationship. Brett did not want to be a mentor to Aaron. He just didn't want to. He just saw that as that's the guy that's trying to replace me. And I think, and I know that Aaron was a little bit different with Love, and maybe he learned that way. He goes, you know what, I don't want to do it that way. But Brett and him, it wasn't like a chilly deal. But Brett didn't feel like he owed Aaron, to show him the ropes. But I tell you what he did do, and what Love ended up doing is just sitting, keeping your mouth shut, and just watching what a Pro Bowl gold jacket looks like. And what an amazing, they have two guys underneath center in Green Bay for 25 years that are wearing gold jackets. That's unheard of.
Yeah, it definitely worked out for the Green Bay Packers and for Ted Thompson with drafting Aaron Rodgers, and then obviously with Brian Gutekunst drafting Jordan Love. That'll do it for tonight's edition of the Locked On Packers Squad Show. Friendly reminder, wherever you guys get audio podcasts, you can now get the Locked On Packers Squad Show and the Daily Show with our guy, Peter Bukowski. They are free and available wherever you get audio podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, and also over on YouTube. If you're watching over on YouTube, make sure you hit the thumbs up. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. And also, make sure you hit that notification bell. Get notified when we go live. We'll be back live on Tuesday with Peter. But for now, we will sign off. For Coach, for Jacob, and for myself, we will be back on Tuesday night talking more Packers offseason football with each and every one of you. Thank you guys for tuning in, and thank you for making Locked On Packers part of your day each and every single day. And as always, make sure you stay locked on Packers.